Call whoever you want. She laughed, until she heard who was on the other end. The boardroom on the 48th floor of Whitmore Financial Tower was silent except for the faint hum of the city far below. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the room, revealing the skyline glittering in the late afternoon sun. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, leather chairs, and expensive confidence. At the head of the long glass table sat Monica Hale, CEO of Hale and Whitmore Development Group, one of the most powerful real estate companies in the state. People described Monica as many things. Brilliant. Relentless. Cold. At 43, she had built a billion-dollar empire by doing what others refused to do, making decisions without hesitation. And today was supposed to be a routine meeting. Just another item on a busy schedule. Another property. Another demolition. Another profitable development. Across from her sat a man who clearly did not belong in this room. His coat was worn. The sleeves slightly frayed. His gray hair was neatly combed, but age had etched quiet lines across his face. His name was Samuel Carter. And no one in the room knew who he really was. To them he was just an old man wasting their time. Monica leaned back in her chair as Samuel finished speaking. He had been talking calmly for several minutes, explaining why the residents of Lincoln Terrace Apartments needed more time before eviction. 14 families lived there. Most were elderly. A few had disabilities. 2 were veterans. Samuel had spoken respectfully, clearly, and without emotion. He wasn't asking the company to cancel the project. He wasn't demanding anything unreasonable. He only asked for 60 days. 60 days for people to find new homes. 60 days to move the memories of a lifetime. 60 days of dignity. The room responded with silence. Then Monica spoke. Her voice was smooth and controlled. Mr. Carter, she said, folding her hands on the table, our company followed every legal procedure required by law. Her assistant, Brandon Wells, nodded immediately. All permits approved, Brandon added. Demolition contracts signed. Construction financing secured. Another executive, Lisa Grant, glanced at her tablet. Any delay would cost the company approximately $420,000 per week. Monica didn't look away from Samuel. Her gaze remained steady, neutral, professional. Which means, she concluded, your request is not possible. Samuel listened quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded. Outside the windows, the sun dipped lower behind the skyscrapers. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere shifted into something colder. Brandon leaned back with a faint smirk. He had seen situations like this before. Community activists, concerned neighbors, people who thought emotion could compete with business. It never did. Samuel rested his hands on the table. For a moment he looked down. Not defeated, just thoughtful. Then he looked up again. Ms. Hale, he said calmly, I understand the numbers. Monica's eyebrow lifted slightly. Few people spoke that way in this room. Most pleaded. Most argued. Samuel continued. But sometimes decisions are bigger than numbers. Brandon chuckled under his breath. Monica ignored him. She had heard speeches like this before. She had built an empire learning how to ignore them. This meeting is finished, she said. But Samuel didn't stand. Instead, he slowly reached into the inside pocket of his coat. Brandon raised an eyebrow. Lisa looked confused. Samuel pulled out an older smartphone. The kind most executives would have replaced years ago. He placed it gently on the table. Then he looked at Monica. If you don't mind, he said quietly, I would like to make one phone call. The room went still. For a moment, Monica didn't react. Then something almost like amusement appeared in her eyes. She leaned back in her chair again. Well, she said lightly, this should be interesting. Brandon laughed openly now. Yes, he said. Call whoever you want. Lisa tried to hide a smile. The tension in the room shifted into something else. Entertainment. Monica tilted her head slightly. Her voice carried a hint of sarcasm. Go ahead, Mr. Carter. She gestured toward the phone. Call whoever you want. Samuel nodded politely. He didn't scroll through contacts. He didn't hesitate. Instead, he dialed a number from memory. 1 digit at a time. Calmly. Confidently. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Brandon tapped his fingers on the table impatiently. Then the call connected. A deep voice answered immediately. Samuel. The voice was steady. Familiar. Powerful. I was wondering when you'd call. Samuel smiled slightly. Good afternoon, Daniel. Across the table, Monica froze. Her posture changed instantly. Because she recognized that voice. Everyone in the room did. It belonged to Governor Daniel Whitmore. The same man whose name was on the building. The same man who controlled billions in infrastructure funding. The same man whose approval could make or destroy corporate empires. Samuel continued speaking calmly. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "No bother," the governor replied. "Actually, I'm glad you called." Monica slowly sat forward in her chair. Brandon's smirk vanished. Lisa's tablet slipped slightly from her hands. Governor Whitmore's voice continued through the speaker. "Are you still at Hale and Whitmore headquarters?" Samuel glanced around the boardroom. "Yes." Pause. Then the governor said something that changed everything. "Good." Another pause. "I'd like to speak with Monica." The silence that followed was heavy. Brandon stared at Samuel. Lisa looked at Monica. Monica herself didn't move. For the first time since the meeting started. She looked uncertain. Samuel gently slid the phone across the table. Right toward her. "Governor Whitmore would like to speak with you." No one laughed anymore. The room had gone completely still. Monica slowly reached for the phone. Her hand, normally steady, paused for just a fraction of a second. Then she picked it up. "Governor Whitmore," she said carefully. "Yes," the governor replied. His tone was calm. But there was weight behind it. "Monica, do you know who Mr. Samuel Carter is?" Monica glanced across the table. Samuel simply sat quietly. Patiently. Waiting. "I'm afraid I don't," Monica admitted. The governor exhaled softly. "That doesn't surprise me," he said. Another pause. Then he spoke the sentence that made every person in the room sit straighter. "Samuel Carter is the man who built the housing program that saved 23,000 families in this state." Brandon blinked. Lisa looked shocked. Monica said nothing. The governor continued. "He's also the man who helped my own family keep our home 35 years ago." The room went colder. "And," the governor added quietly, "he's someone I respect more than almost anyone I know." Monica slowly looked up. At Samuel. The man in the worn coat. The man they had dismissed. The man they had laughed at. The governor's voice returned. "So Monica." Another pause. "How many doors do you think Mr. Carter knocked on before he called me?" No one in the boardroom spoke. Because suddenly, the most powerful woman in the room wasn't Monica Hale anymore. It was the quiet old man sitting across the table. And the story of how they underestimated him was only just beginning. The man they thought was powerless. For several seconds after the governor's words, the boardroom remained completely silent. Not the polite silence of corporate meetings. Not the bored silence of executives waiting for the next agenda item. This was different. This was the silence of realization. Monica Hale held the phone carefully in her hand, her eyes fixed on Samuel Carter across the glass table. He still sat exactly the same way he had from the beginning of the meeting. Calm, quiet, patient. As if none of this surprised him. On the other side of the phone, Governor Daniel Whitmore waited. "Monica," he said again, his voice steady through the speaker, "are you still there?" "Yes, Governor," she replied quickly, regaining some composure. "I'm here." "Good," Whitmore said. "Then let me explain something that perhaps your research team failed to mention." Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Lisa stopped typing completely. Every person in the room was now listening. 32 years ago, the governor continued, there was a housing crisis in this state. He paused briefly. Thousands of working families were losing their homes. Monica listened carefully. "I remember," she said cautiously. "My father talked about it." "Then you also remember," Whitmore replied, "the program that saved those families." Monica's mind raced. Of course she knew about the program. Every business school case study mentioned it. The Carter Housing Stabilization Initiative. One of the most successful public-private housing partnerships in state history. It had prevented mass displacement during the recession decades earlier. But Monica had never once wondered who the Carter in the program's name actually was. She slowly looked back at Samuel. The governor continued speaking. "That program was created by the man sitting across from you right now." Brandon's face turned pale. Lisa's mouth opened slightly. Samuel simply folded his hands. Still calm. Still patient. Still humble. The governor's voice carried through the room again. Mr. Carter was the architect behind the housing protections that kept 23,000 families from losing everything. Monica swallowed quietly. "And yet," Whitmore added, "he has never once taken credit for it." Samuel finally spoke. His tone was gentle. "Governor," he said, "you don't have to." "Yes," Whitmore interrupted softly. "I do." Another pause. Because the governor wasn't finished. What you should also know, he said, is that Samuel Carter has spent his entire life helping people who had no one else. He continued. Shelters. Community housing. Veteran relocation programs. The governor sighed. And for 25 years he refused every political position I offered him. Monica's grip tightened around the phone. Brandon leaned forward. Lisa stared at Samuel with growing disbelief. The governor finished the sentence that stunned the room. Because he believed helping people should never be about power. Samuel finally shook his head slightly. You're embarrassing me, Daniel. But the governor chuckled softly. You deserve it, Sam. Another silence filled the room. Then Whitmore's tone shifted slightly. Still calm. But now serious. Now tell me something, Monica. Monica straightened. Yes, Governor? How did a man like Samuel Carter feel so ignored that he finally had to call me? No one breathed. Monica hesitated. She searched for the precise executive answer. But none came. Finally she spoke. He requested a 60-day extension for the Lincoln Terrace residents. I know, the governor replied. And? Monica glanced at Brandon and Lisa. Then back at Samuel. Our construction timeline makes that difficult. Another pause. The governor's voice lowered slightly. Difficult? Or inconvenient? Monica didn't respond immediately. Because for the first time in a very long time, she felt something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Samuel finally spoke. Governor Whitmore, I didn't call you to pressure anyone. His voice remained steady. I only wanted the opportunity for a conversation. I know, the governor said. That's exactly why I respect you. Then Whitmore spoke again to Monica. You see, Monica, Samuel Carter has one rule. What rule? She asked quietly. He always gives people the chance to do the right thing on their own. Samuel nodded. That's all I came here for. Monica slowly placed the phone back on the table. The room was no longer the same. The balance of power had shifted. Completely. Brandon avoided Samuel's gaze now. Lisa sat silently. Monica looked directly at Samuel. For the first time since the meeting began, she truly saw him. Not as an obstacle. Not as an activist. But as someone with a story she had never bothered to understand. You said 14 residents live there, Monica said slowly. Samuel nodded. Yes. Elderly? Most. Disabled? A few. Monica leaned back thinking. Numbers moved automatically in her mind. Construction penalties. Contractor timelines. Investor expectations. But something else moved now too. Something she had long trained herself to ignore. Conscience. Samuel waited quietly. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He simply allowed the moment to exist. Governor Whitmore's voice returned through the phone. I'll leave the decision to you, Monica. Then he added something unexpected. But remember something Samuel once told me. What's that? She asked. The governor replied softly. The true test of power is how you treat people who cannot benefit you. Another silence filled the boardroom. Monica stared out the massive window. 48 floors below, the city continued moving. Cars, people, lives, and somewhere among them, 14 families waited to learn whether their homes would disappear in 30 days. Or 60. Finally Monica turned back to the table. She looked directly at Samuel Carter. And for the first time, there was no arrogance in her voice. Only honesty. Mr. Carter, she said. Yes. I think we should talk. Samuel smiled slightly. Because the conversation was finally beginning. The debt no one remembered. The tension in the boardroom had completely changed. Just minutes earlier the executives had been amused. Now they were cautious, careful, respectful. Monica Hale placed the phone back onto the conference table, though Governor Whitmore's voice still quietly carried through the speaker. She turned toward Samuel Carter again. For the first time since the meeting began she studied him differently. Not as an obstacle. Not as a protester. But as a man whose story she clearly didn't know. You said 14 residents live in Lincoln Terrace, Monica began. Yes, Samuel replied calmly. Most of them elderly? Most. And some disabled? A few. Monica leaned back in her chair, slowly tapping her fingers against the glass table. Her mind worked the way it always did. Quick calculations. Timelines. Risk. Profit. But now there was something else she had not expected. Curiosity. Mr. Carter, she said, how long have you been working with that building? Samuel thought for a moment. About 19 years. Lisa looked surprised. 19. Samuel nodded. I helped establish the community housing agreement when the building was first converted. Brandon frowned. Converted from what? A factory warehouse, Samuel replied. It was abandoned after the textile company closed. He spoke casually. But Monica's eyes sharpened, because she knew that story. That redevelopment had been one of the earliest examples of community-based housing transformation in the state. It was studied in urban planning programs across the country. And yet somehow, no one had connected that project to the quiet man sitting in front of them. Samuel continued. At the time, no investor wanted the property. Why? Lisa asked. Too risky, Samuel said simply. The neighborhood had high unemployment and declining property values. Brandon scoffed slightly. So the building was worthless. Samuel shook his head gently. No. It was full of people who needed stability. Another quiet silence followed. Monica asked the next question. And you organized the conversion? With a small group of volunteers. You funded it? Samuel smiled faintly. Not exactly. How then? Brandon asked skeptically. Samuel leaned back slightly. We convinced a few local businesses to invest in community housing rather than commercial redevelopment. Brandon raised an eyebrow. That must have taken a lot of negotiation. Samuel nodded. It did. The governor's voice returned from the phone. That's Samuel's specialty. Monica looked at the phone. Governor Whitmore? Yes. You might find this interesting, Monica. What? The Lincoln Terrace building you're planning to demolish. He paused. Was the very first project Samuel Carter ever completed. Monica's eyes widened slightly. The first? Yes. Samuel shrugged modestly. It wasn't perfect. Lisa leaned forward. But it worked. Samuel nodded. Yes. For 19 years it gave people homes. Brandon suddenly asked a question that had been bothering him. If you're responsible for that project, he said, then why aren't you wealthy? Samuel chuckled softly. Because I never charged anyone for helping them. The room fell silent again. Monica slowly processed that answer. 19 years. Hundreds of residents. Dozens of housing projects. And the man had never tried to profit from it. Governor Whitmore spoke again. You should also know something else. What's that? Monica asked. Samuel Carter declined a consulting contract from your company 8 years ago. Monica frowned. What? Samuel looked slightly embarrassed. It was a misunderstanding. No, the governor said calmly. It wasn't. Monica turned to Brandon. Did we offer him a contract? Brandon quickly opened his laptop. After a few seconds he froze. Yes, he said slowly. What kind of contract? Brandon looked up. A 7-figure consulting agreement for urban housing development. Lisa stared at Samuel. You turned that down? Samuel nodded. I didn't feel comfortable advising companies that removed communities faster than they replaced them. The room went completely still again. Monica stared at him. You refused $7 million? Samuel smiled gently. I already had enough. Brandon shook his head in disbelief. That doesn't make any sense. Samuel looked at him kindly. Helping people makes sense to me. Monica studied him again. Something about his calm confidence unsettled her. Not because he had power, but because he clearly didn't need it. Mr. Carter, she said carefully, why didn't you mention any of this when you came in? Samuel shrugged. Because I didn't come here to impress anyone. He paused. I came here to ask for 60 days. The simplicity of the statement filled the room. No speeches. No accusations. Just a simple request. Governor Whitmore spoke once more. Monica, do you know what Samuel did during the winter crisis 15 years ago? Monica shook her head. No. He organized emergency housing for over 500 displaced families in less than 2 weeks. Lisa whispered quietly. How is that even possible? The governor answered. Because people trust him. Samuel sighed lightly. You're making this sound dramatic. Whitmore chuckled. History usually is. Then the governor added one more thing. Samuel never asked for recognition. Monica looked at him. Why? Samuel answered quietly. Because the goal was never recognition. What was it then? Stability. Another silence followed. The executives slowly realized something important. The man they had dismissed as irrelevant had quietly shaped housing policy in their state for decades, and they had never even noticed. Monica leaned forward. Her voice softer now. Mr. Carter. Yes. If the project moves forward. He waited. What happens to the residents? Samuel answered without hesitation. They lose their homes. Lisa looked uncomfortable. Brandon shifted in his seat. Monica asked the next question. And 60 days would change that? Samuel nodded. Yes. How? It gives them time. For what? To find places they can afford. Monica exhaled slowly. Outside the massive windows, the city lights were beginning to glow. The skyline shimmered. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The meeting was no longer about numbers. It was about something else. Something deeper. Monica looked at Samuel Carter. The quiet man in the worn coat. The man who had changed thousands of lives without seeking credit. And suddenly, she realized something that made the entire situation feel different. He hadn't come to threaten them. He hadn't come to embarrass them. He had simply come to give them a chance. A chance to do the right thing. And now, that choice belonged to her. The moment the truth changed everything. The lights of the city had begun to glow outside the massive windows of the boardroom. From the 48th floor, the skyline looked peaceful. Calm. But inside the room, the atmosphere had shifted into something heavy with realization. Monica Hale sat very still. Her eyes remained fixed on Samuel Carter. The man she had nearly dismissed without a second thought. The man she had allowed her executives to laugh at. And the man who had quietly built housing programs that had shaped the city she now profited from. For years Monica believed she understood power. Power meant influence. Power meant capital. Power meant controlling billion-dollar projects and development timelines. But sitting across from Samuel Carter, she was beginning to understand something else. Real influence did not always look powerful. Sometimes it looked like a worn coat and calm patience. Governor Whitmore's voice still came through the phone on the table. Monica, he said gently. Yes, Governor. You know I rarely interfere in private business decisions. That's true, she admitted. And I'm not calling to demand anything. Monica nodded slowly. I understand. Whitmore continued. But you should know something about the man sitting across from you. Samuel sighed quietly. Daniel? Just listen, Sam, the governor replied kindly. Then he spoke again to Monica. Do you know why the Carter Housing Stabilization Initiative succeeded when every other program failed? Monica shook her head. No. Because Samuel refused to design it from a boardroom. Brandon frowned. What does that mean? The governor answered. It means he spent months living in the same neighborhoods that were being affected. Lisa blinked. He actually moved there? Yes. Samuel shrugged slightly. I wanted to understand the situation. Whitmore continued. He visited families who were facing eviction. Listened to them. Learned what they needed. The governor paused. And then he designed the program around their lives, not around policy theory. The room fell silent again. Because everyone in that boardroom knew the truth. Most corporate housing programs were designed the opposite way. Numbers first. People later. Monica slowly spoke. You lived among the residents? Samuel nodded. For almost a year. Lisa looked stunned. Why would you do that? Samuel answered simply. Because you cannot solve problems you don't understand. Brandon leaned back, clearly uncomfortable now. Still, he said carefully, business decisions can't always prioritize emotions. Samuel smiled gently. This isn't about emotions. Then what is it about? Brandon asked. Samuel looked directly at him. Consequences. Brandon said nothing. Monica turned towards Samuel again. You said you've known the Lincoln Terrace residents for 19 years. Yes. And they trust you. Samuel nodded. They trust that someone will at least try to help. Monica slowly folded her hands. Her mind was working through a completely different set of calculations now. Not financial ones. Human ones. She looked at the eviction notice sitting on the table. 30 days. Legally acceptable. Financially efficient. But suddenly it felt different. She turned to the governor's phone. Governor Whitmore. Yes. If this project is delayed 60 days. Samuel quietly shook his head. But Monica continued. The company will lose several $1 million. Whitmore responded calmly. I'm aware. And our investors will not be pleased. That's also true. Monica stared at the skyline for a long moment. Then she asked a question no one in the room expected. Governor, do you know how many people currently live in buildings developed by my company? Thousands, Whitmore replied. Yes. Another pause. Then Monica turned back to Samuel Carter. For the first time since the meeting began. Her voice carried genuine respect. Mr. Carter. Yes. You spent decades protecting communities. Samuel nodded. I tried. And you never asked for recognition. No. Or money. Samuel smiled faintly. I had enough to live comfortably. Brandon suddenly spoke again. But this project is already approved. Monica didn't look at him. We know. The contracts are signed. We know that too. The investors. Brandon. Her voice stopped him instantly. Yes, Monica? She finally looked at him. And when she spoke again, her decision had already been made. Tell the contractors to pause demolition preparation. Brandon blinked. What? 60 days, Monica said. The room froze. Lisa looked shocked. Brandon looked stunned. Samuel said nothing. Monica turned toward him. You asked for 60 days. Samuel nodded slowly. Yes. You'll have them. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Not tense. Just profound. Samuel studied Monica for a moment. You didn't have to do that. Monica leaned back slightly. No. She glanced toward the phone again. But sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. Governor Whitmore chuckled softly. I had a feeling you'd say that. Brandon rubbed his forehead. This is going to upset the investors. Monica shrugged calmly. Then I'll explain it to them. Lisa looked at Samuel with curiosity. Mr. Carter, what will you do with 60 days? Samuel answered quietly. I'll help 14 people find homes. Simple. Clear. Monica smiled slightly. For someone who turned down $7 million. Samuel chuckled. That was never the goal. Monica stood from her chair. The meeting had changed completely. But something inside her had changed as well. She walked toward the window and looked out over the city. Then she said something that surprised everyone. Mr. Carter. Yes. I think our company could learn something from you. Samuel tilted his head. Such as? How to build communities instead of just buildings. Samuel thought about that for a moment. Then he smiled. That would be a good start. The governor's voice came through the phone again. Well, he said warmly. I think this conversation turned out better than expected. Samuel nodded. Yes. Then Monica said something that no one in the room had predicted. Mr. Carter? Yes. If you're willing. She paused briefly. I'd like you to help us redesign this project. Samuel looked surprised. Redesign? Yes. Why? Monica answered honestly. Because the city doesn't need another luxury tower. She looked back at him. It needs housing people can actually afford. For the first time in the entire meeting, Samuel Carter looked genuinely impressed. And the executives sitting in that room suddenly realized something powerful. The quiet man they had underestimated had just changed the direction of a billion-dollar project. Without raising his voice. Without threatening anyone. Without demanding anything. Simply by standing firm. And reminding them of something they had forgotten. Respect. Respect is the real power. The meeting officially ended a few minutes later, but no one rushed out of the boardroom. Something important had just happened. Not just a decision about a building. Something bigger. Brandon sat quietly, still trying to process what had just unfolded. Lisa closed her tablet slowly. Samuel Carter stood up from his chair and adjusted his worn coat. Monica Hale watched him carefully. A man who had walked into the room with no title, no status, no visible influence. And had just changed the direction of a billion-dollar development project. Without threatening anyone. Without demanding recognition. Just by standing firm for people who needed help. Samuel picked up his phone from the table. Thank you for hearing me out, he said politely. Monica shook her head slightly. No, she replied. Thank you for reminding us what we forgot. Samuel smiled. But before he could leave, Brandon finally spoke. Mr. Carter? Samuel turned back. Yes. Brandon looked slightly embarrassed. I want to apologize. Samuel tilted his head. For what? Brandon sighed. For assuming you didn't belong in this room. Samuel chuckled gently. That's all right. Lisa added quietly, we judged you too quickly. Samuel nodded calmly. That happens. He looked around the room. But it's always good when people are willing to reconsider. Monica stepped closer to the table. Mr. Carter, about what I mentioned earlier. The redesign? Yes. Samuel folded his arms slightly. What did you have in mind? Monica walked to the large window overlooking the city. Then she spoke slowly. The Lincoln Terrace property sits on 3 acres. Samuel nodded. That's correct. The original plan was a luxury residential tower. Samuel nodded again. Yes. Monica turned back toward him. But what if we built something different? What do you mean? Mixed income housing. Brandon looked surprised. Lisa's eyes widened. Monica continued. Affordable units on the lower levels. Market rate apartments above. And community spaces built into the design. Samuel looked thoughtful. That would be complicated. Yes, Monica admitted. But it would keep part of the original community intact. Samuel studied her expression carefully. You're serious? I am. Lisa spoke up. That kind of development could become a national model. Brandon nodded slowly. And it would generate positive public attention. Monica raised an eyebrow. That's not why we're doing it. Brandon smiled awkwardly. Right, of course. Samuel looked back toward the skyline. Then he said quietly, Lincoln Terrace was built to give people stability. Monica nodded. And that's what it should continue doing. Samuel took a long breath. You know something, Ms. Hale? What's that? When I walked into this building today, I expected to fail. Monica looked surprised. You did? Yes. Then why come at all? Samuel smiled slightly. Because sometimes people surprise you. Monica returned the smile. I'm glad we did. At that moment the phone on the table buzzed again. Governor Whitmore had not hung up. His voice returned. Sounds like progress. Samuel laughed. You're still listening? I was curious how the conversation would end. Monica picked up the phone. Well, Governor, I think you'll approve. Whitmore chuckled. I already do. Samuel looked around the boardroom one more time. It looked completely different now. The same glass table. The same chairs. The same executives. But the energy had changed. Earlier this room had been full of dismissal. Now it held something else. Respect. Samuel turned toward the door. I should get back to Lincoln Terrace. Monica stopped him. Before you go. Samuel paused. Yes. I'd like to visit the building tomorrow. Samuel looked surprised. You? Yes. Why? Monica answered honestly. Because I've been building projects for 20 years. She paused. And I've never actually met the people who live in them. Samuel smiled. That would be a good place to start. The next morning something unusual happened. A black company car pulled up outside Lincoln Terrace Apartments. Residents looked out their windows curiously. Inside the car sat Monica Hale. Next to her sat Samuel Carter. When they stepped out, people gathered slowly. Mrs. Donnelly from the second floor. Ray the retired steelworker. Angela and her 2 children. Samuel introduced Monica to each of them. One by one. Monica listened as they spoke. Their concerns. Their fears. Their hopes. And for the first time in her career, she understood the true impact of the decisions she made from a boardroom. 2 months later, a press conference was held at the same location. News reporters gathered. City officials attended. Governor Whitmore stood at the podium. Behind him stood Monica Hale. And beside her stood Samuel Carter. Whitmore addressed the crowd. Today we are announcing a new housing development that will become a model for community-focused urban design. He gestured toward Monica. This project will include affordable housing, community spaces, and long-term stability for the residents who built this neighborhood. Reporters began asking questions. One reporter asked Monica directly, "What made your company change its original development plan?" Monica looked briefly at Samuel. Then she answered honestly, "Because someone reminded us that real progress isn't just about profit." She paused. "It's about people." The reporter asked another question. "And who reminded you of that?" Monica smiled slightly. Then she stepped aside and gestured toward Samuel Carter. "This man did." The crowd applauded. Samuel looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention. But the applause continued. Not because he demanded recognition, but because people were finally learning what he had done quietly for decades. After the press conference ended, Monica walked over to him. "You were right." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Sometimes the most powerful people." She looked around the crowd. "Are the ones no one notices." Samuel smiled gently. "Well?" He looked at the residents standing nearby. "That's why it's important to treat everyone with respect." Monica nodded. Because now she understood something she had never fully realized before. Power is temporary. Money is temporary. Titles are temporary. But respect lasts forever. And the greatest mistake anyone can make is underestimating someone simply because they appear ordinary. Because sometimes, the quiet person in the worn coat is the one who can change everything.